Now, to formally welcome us and introduce this year's awardee, let us hear from the Executive Director of PSSC. She was a professor of communication at the UP Diliman College of Mass Communication and was former chair and vice chair of the Board of Trustees. She also served as college secretary of UPCMC, chair of its Communication Research Department, and special assistant of the president of the UP system. Let's welcome back Dr. Lourdes Portes.
Hi, good afternoon and welcome once again, this time to the PSSC's Virginia A. Miralao Excellence in Research Awarding Ceremony. In its 53 years of existence, PSSC has strived hard to assist social scientists to pursue their research and other scholarly activities, conduct capacity building trainings to further hone their knowledge and skills, and acknowledge their work and contribution to society. One of the programs that recognizes and celebrates the works and achievements of the social scientists is the VAM Award. What is the VAM Award anyway? So I'd like you to please watch this short video. So for 2021, the award goes to, tadan, wala tayong bugle drum, ano? But the winner is Dr. George Emmanuel Borrinaga of the Philippine National Historical Society, or PNHS. He was nominated by no less than the president of the PNHS, Dr. Bernardita Churchill, who I am sure is now beaming with joy and pride, along with the other PNHS members, such as Doctors Nela Florendo and Marcelino Macapinlac, because of their organization's success. From a set of nominees, the Board of Judges selected a winner Prof. Borrinaga's article, José Rizal in the Emotional Landscape of Samar and Leyte at the Turn of the 20th Century, published in 2020 by PNHS in its The Journal of History, volume ano to? LXVI. Anyway, I forgot my Roman. Anyway, so why? Why was it selected? The article contributes to new knowledge on the Philippines' struggle against Spanish and early American colonial rule, particularly on how this struggle and an accompanying sense of nationalism spread through the islands through Rizal's martyrdom. The unique presentation of analyzing local developments through popular songs and poems during the revolutionary period lends credence to the rise of nationalist fervor or of Philippine nationalism beyond the confines of Manila and the Tagalog-speaking regions. It traverses beyond the country's educated elite who could read Rizal's writing. As a fitting tribute to our awardee, he will not only receive cash, but will own a unique creation by visual artist Toym Imao. Mr. Imao designed the VAM Fury using trophy, I mean the VAM trophy, using welded metals finished in polyurethane. He artistically shaped the PSSC acronyms into flames to symbolize knowledge. All the letters or acronyms take the form of the element fire to further depict wisdom as an ideal pursuit of social scientists. Prominent in the trophy is a face almost shaped like a heart and whose eyes penetrate what is inside the brain and by extension what is inside the soul. This is the face of the social scientist, and the metaphors of the heart and the eyes depict the social sciences that critically study events in society and their effects on its people. In particular, the heart represents the care and desire to be of service to society and be concerned with the country's development. Perched on a high platform made of ripples connoting upward movement, the trophy stands tall for two reasons. First, to have a vantage point on social phenomena, and second, to be visible, as in giving recognition to the efforts of the social sciences to contribute to Philippine communities' development. This VAM trophy represents such acknowledgement and gratitude as it is bestowed to the exceptional awardee. Last year, PSSC has started to institute a new feature of the VAM awarding ceremony, which is that of a lecture to be given by the awardee. I think this is what we have been waiting for. So as we present the cash prize and trophy to Dr. Borrinaga, this will be followed by his lecture. Now, it is my honor and privilege to introduce to you our awardee. Dr. George Emmanuel Borrinaga is a faculty member of the History section of the Department of Anthropology, Sociology, and History at the University of San Carlos, Cebu City. Prior to this, he was a junior software engineer and web developer of ICOM International in Cebu City. He obtained a BS Computer Engineering major in networking at the University of San Carlos Technological Center in Cebu, and later switched to and completed a Master of Arts in History also at the University of San Carlos in Cebu City. He then went to the Department of History, University of Hull in United Kingdom, and finished his PhD history with a dissertation, Solidarity and Crisis Derive Identities in Samar and Leyte, Philippines, 1565 to present, where his winning article was derived from. Dr. Borinaga has to his name several publications circulated locally, internationally, and online. He has also been a recipient of the Young Historian's Prize for his MA thesis titled The Pulahan Movement in Leyte 1902-1907, which was awarded by the National Committee on Historical Research of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. He was also a regional finalist for the Visayas for his essay, The Ramon Magsaysay Awardee, whose story inspires me the most. The award was conferred by the Ramon Magsaysay Award Foundation. Our awardee holds several positions in professional societies and national committees, such as National Committee on Historical Research, Subcommission on Cultural Heritage, where he is the Secretary of the Executive Council, and the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, where he is Vice President for the Visayas. He is a lifetime member of the Philippine National Historical Society and a trustee as well. As a prolific scholar, he has presented academic papers locally and internationally and has co-organized conferences in the Philippines and United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome the Philippine National Historical Society's pride, Dr. George Emmanuel Borrinaga.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Ma'am Lourdes. Let me first share my slides where I have a longer thank you list for everyone who made the selection of my entry, the winning one for 2021, and for uh, the writing, making the writing of this essay possible. So the title is Jose Rizal in the Emotional Landscape of Samar and Leyte at the turn of the 20th century. So as mentioned by Dr. Portus, this was initially written as part of my PhD dissertation, but because it was beginning to get too long, so I had to set it aside. And thankfully I was given an opportunity to expand the notes I had for that section of my thesis, and it became the article I presented at the National Museum in October 2019. So uh, again, my thank you list first to the PSSC, so Dr. Portus, the PSSC board, so Ma'am Karen for facilitating the my attending this awarding, and the VAMERA selection committee, and of course the rest of the PSSC. And for the PNHS, I'd like to thank Dr. Bernardita Reyes Churchill for uh, nominating my essay or my article to be part of the uh, 2021 entry of the VAMERA. So also I'd like to thank my father, Rolando Borrinaga, who was the issue editor for the 2020 volume of the GOH, and to Ronald Escanlar, who does the layout for the Journal of History, and also to the uh, PNHS board. So some of them are here, Sir Noy, Ma'am Nella, and for my PhD, I'd like to thank my supervisors, Craig Bankoff, Robin Pearson, and my examiners, internal examiner, Jane Rowling, and Vicente Rafael, my external examiner. And at USC, I'd like to thank Professor Jojin Pascual, Ma'am Laila Labajo, Sir Nestor Pacana, and finally Father Alexander Gaot, SPD. So the writing of this article would not also have been possible without my students. So I've been teaching this subject for a few years now. So before K to 12, it was known at the University of San Carlos as History 17, and uh, at the moment it's called uh, General Education LWR, Life Works and Writings. So my article asks three questions. So, what role did the memory of the martyred Rizal play in the nationalist movement in Samar and Leyte? So, we're quite familiar with events in Manila, in the Tagalog-speaking provinces. So, the first provinces said to have risen up against Spain. But what about the rest of the country? So, there's still a big gap in trying to integrate all this knowledge, and especially the role of Rizal. Okay, we tend to think of Rizal as a peaceful reformist. So even my students, there's still this really uh, uh, strong idea that Rizal was not for armed struggle, but he advocated peaceful means. And second is what emotions, values, and practices were at play in these mobilizations. And third, what was Rizal's lasting significance for the region's newly identifying Filipino communities, as the armed struggle, in particular around 1907, gave way to a new round of colonization under the Americans. So I use emotional landscape as a means of signaling. I refer to how the landscapes, especially in local literature, Waray literature, has been noted to be usually associated with persons, so people close to someone, so either your mother or your aunts or siblings and friends. So this has been a recurrent theme in a lot of literary works. But here I try to show it's not only true for written literature or vernacular literature in the Visayas and even in other parts of the Philippines, but also in oral traditions. So in particular, I focus on the turn of the 20th century as an example of this, and with Rizal as the uh, greatest among these figures that have been memorialized in folk songs, and not only in poems, standard source that we might associate with Rizal, written texts, but also songs that were recorded decades after, but which might reference events from the revolutionary period. So I also uh, compare this with some of Benedict Anderson's observations in imagined communities, the important role of the novel, and also the idea of not necessarily being willing to kill for the country, but willing to die for the country. So that was the observation Benedict Anderson made about the prevalent sentiment in texts like Rizal's Mi Ultimo Adios. So in terms of approaches, I, as mentioned, looked at folk songs, but later I also realized that it would be difficult to uh, pinpoint the exact timeline when these songs emerged. So one way of trying to pin it down to a particular decade or a particular period was to compare it with themes that emerged in written text. So usually from elite types, so mga poets or playwrights, and some of them you will see in the article. But I also want to highlight the role of orality. So not only literacy, because the tendency, especially or even among nationalist historians, is that the masses were not really that much connected with Rizal and the revolution because they couldn't read. So there's still this prevalent assumption that they needed the Ilustrados in order to participate and to continue the revolution. So I show there are other ways of uh, promoting nationalist sentiment or in expressing ideas of independence, independent of the Ilustrados or independent of written texts. And finally, I want to highlight the role of translation uh, of texts like Rizal's, which were mostly written in Spanish, and also adaptation, how to make Rizal's ideas palatable or understandable to local societies. So make it concrete rather than abstract. And the article, I also wrote a sort of condensed version, which appeared in Rizal Day last year, which I hope to also use here in terms of the structure. So I will be uh, analyzing three songs taken from the uh, Journal of History article and explicating some of their significant themes and ideas. So this is the first song which comes from a 1987 article by Father Lope Robredillo. So he's a diocesan priest based in Eastern Samar. So he wrote about his town, Dolores, and he uh, was able to present this very short excerpt, from what I believe is a longer song. But what's interesting about the source, Benjamin Lazara, was he was in his old age. So he is said to have fought uh, for the revolutionary forces under Aguinaldo. So there was a general, General Vicente Locban, who was from the Bicol region, sent to the to Samar to lead the forces there. And he also, Benjamin Lazara, joined the Pulahanes later on. So the Pulahanes was this usually portrayed as a millenarian movement. But interestingly, uh, the song that he sung had links or was centered on Rizal's death. So a lot of these songs, which I included in the article, starts with this line, "Kamatay ni Rizal." So nung namatay si Rizal in Tagalog. So somehow that had a special significance across songs from different localities, different barrios, and that's how I argue. It was Rizal's death more than anything else that had uh, encouraged people to join the anti-colonial struggle in at least in Samar and Leyte. And you can note, you would observe from the song that uh, this was obviously from the uh, revolutionary forces. So they were trying to promote revolution, trying to saying we have just been through a very difficult path, so colonialism. So how do we break free from that? So it was only through revolution. And with uh, actually with the help of some of my students in 2 semesters ago, I think, two of them were from Samar, and they were the ones who told me, pag empezar is, uh, there's a Samar word for that, which is actually borrowed Spanish. So to start, and that's also probably where umpisa in Tagalog comes from. And tulid, tuwid, just, so it's a just condition, kahimtang, kalagayan in Tagalog. So they were trying to say that this is the right path. Ito yung tuwid na daan towards freedom and independence, only through revolution. And also, I would argue this was from 1899 because the other line from the song references Aguinaldo. So you see this pattern where uh, other heroes that are quite well known to us, Aguinaldo, even Bonifacio, they always somehow associated themselves with the story of Rizal or Rizal's death. So this would suggest that despite the differences between Aguinaldo and Bonifacio, they all looked up to Rizal, or somehow they attempted to associate their name with Rizal in order to promote revolution. But it's not only Rizal who appears in local songs or local narratives. So even before the revolution or Lukban reached the Samar Leyte area, you already encounter names like Father Burgos. So in 1882, 1883, there was a cholera epidemic, and one of the effects of that or impacts of that epidemic was to uh, trigger a millenarian movement, so what they call the Dios Dios movement. And in one of the reports by the Guardia Civil, so they were a bit worried about this line. There were prayers by these sectarians that were recommending prayers for a certain Padre Burgos so that the mystery is completed. So that would suggest a sort of apocalyptic narrative, and somehow what we consider as nationalist figures like Padre Burgos could also be integrated into these narratives of these groups that we might now categorize as religious cults, but which also participated in the revolution, although they would not necessarily be on good terms with the elite leadership, with people like Vicente Lucban. So other events that uh, made this possible, okay, if you notice, they were also trying to uh, perhaps gain a critical mass in the revolution. So why was it somehow not yet as accepted in the, or not yet as big in the Samar Leyte region? So one possibility is the 1897 typhoon and also the exile of these DSDS leaders. So because of their concern, there was a crackdown on this movement. A lot of their leaders were exiled to other islands, including to Mindanao or the Palawan area. And that's why there was no mass mobilization, perhaps in the region in the 1897 to 1900 period. But in the essay, I also uh, include references to elite figures who were participants in the revolution, but who later pursued other means of gaining independence. So this is the one of the key arguments I make, that uh, rather than just uh, promoting revolution, Rizal's death had also served as inspiration both for revolutionary or people for armed struggle, but also for those advocating for peaceful means. And somehow this is the path that has stuck to our minds. Rizal was a peaceful reformist, and perhaps that has something to do with the American occupation, that they promoted this certain view of Rizal. So one of the figures nga I link here to actually the PNHS because he was one of the I think founding members. He was vice president of what was then the Philippine Historical Society before it became the PNHS. So it was established in 1941, but he, along with other elite figures, had links to the revolution. So one, it was only his father who had links, but he would also uh, help later on in the Philippine independence missions. Again, you see here divergent paths towards independence. But you still see revivals of the Dios movement. So the Pulahan movement would reemerge after their leaders had returned from exile, after the defeat of the Spaniards. So they would be able to go home and they would join the anti-colonial struggle against the Americans, but they would be short-lived, their alliance with the elite leaders. So they would uh, continue the struggle on their own. So after the elite leadership had surrendered, Vicente Lucban had been captured, Ambrosio Mojica, General Mojica in Leyte had surrendered. So it was these so-called religious fanatics, as they called them in the reports, who continued the struggle. And interestingly, a lot of them had or new songs about Rizal. So this is the other common thing they had, these songs which reference Rizal and also express their local hopes for independence. So right up to World War II and also the Coloro movement in the 1930s. So here are the key events after the surrenders of the elite leadership or capture of the main leaders under Aguinaldo in between 1900 and 1902. So there was continued resistance against the Americans, and more interestingly, there was much resistance against municipal authorities who had formerly been revolutionary leaders. So they had turned their allegiance towards the Americans, and somehow these people from the barrios, from the hinterlands, uh, continued the armed struggle and also were against things like taxation under the new American government or forced labor and all of these other policies that they found onerous. So what's interesting is again the links with the Dios movement and the millenarian movements of the 1880s. So there were local popes. So Papa Faustino, a former Dios leader who had returned to Leyte from exile, Papa Pablo of Samar, and later after Papa Pablo's death, Papa Otoy took over. So it's similar perhaps to what was happening in Negros with Papa Issue. So in some reports, they are also called Pulahanes, suggesting that this was a Pan-Visayan movement with links to each other. And again, ang link to Rizal because they somehow integrated Rizal into their narratives. So in the 1880s, it was the arrival of a new king, the prophecies they were proclaiming to prospective followers. But by the early 1900s, that new king had become Rizal for a lot of these so-called prophets. So in terms of the elites, I mentioned earlier Jaime de Bayra, who had uh, been provincial secretary and also resident commissioner to Washington, D.C. from 1919 to or 1917 to 1923. So that was, again, also part of the movement for independence, the independence missions. So why this apparent contradiction? So I suggest in the article that these were changing or divergent approaches to seeking independence that we might think are contradictory, but actually were uh, different approaches to the same uh, objective, which was freedom, basically. And it was Rizal who had served as inspiration both for millenarians and also for the Ilustrados. But not only that, it also was localized, these independence ideals. It was not just freedom of the municipality or freedom of the country, uh, as centered in Manila, but it was also barrios and sitios, so small communities who were struggling for independence from their municipal centers, basically. So it was a localized form of nationalism or independence that they were fighting for. So this is also uh, seen in this next song, and here we see more clearly why they would join the revolution or some other form of struggle for independence because of Rizal. So Rizal had become a sibling. So the term they used was igsuon. So take note, these are different linguistic groups, Cebuano, Waray, Tagalog, but somehow through this metaphor of siblingship or kinship terms, they were able to uh, uh, attach their stories, the story of their family, the story of their village to that of the emerging nation. And Rizal's death was seen as the height of Spanish injustice. So here they portray the Spaniards as jubilant over Rizal's death, and Filipinas was wailing, and the singer is offering to reciprocate Rizal's uh, loneliness, basically, because he had been violently separated from his loved ones. So they were offering tears. And in the poems, if you look at the metaphors they used, tears equates to sacrifice, equates to suffering in pursuit of an ideal or a certain goal. So there was this also religious interpretation. If you undergo suffering, you would be rewarded with well-being or a reward. In this case, independence as an ultimate reward. And emotions, so the very heavy emotions felt by the singer because of what happened to Rizal. So they were impelled to a certain course of action, although interestingly, it's not stated what that course of action is. Again, it might have to do with the different courses of action that were open to them, whether it's by joining the revolution or some other means in the later or subsequent periods. But Filipinas, it's only recently, I think after the article came out, that I realized that this was in reference to the motherland. So that was the other image that was popularized in the region. So in Tagalog, it's Inang Bayan, but in the Waray speaking areas, it was Iroy nga tuna. Iroy is mother, tuna is land. So uh, again, the translation of concepts that might have come from Luzon or come from the uh, people like Rizal, but translated to the local languages. So here, the other metaphor is a seed. So a lot of these songs and poems also reference Rizal's sacrifice as these seeds being sown on the ground and bearing fruit. So again, ang possible uh, image is that of the emerging nation. So it was Rizal's sacrifice that had been the seed for the birth of the nation, basically. So that's the term, the first Filipino, perhaps. So the uh, one of the songs, or I think two or more, would refer to Rizal as the favorite and esteemed child of the beloved motherland. And again, ang idea, Rizal was the sibling. We are Rizal siblings. We share the same motherland. No longer Madre España, and we had to follow Rizal's example because he had offered his own life to liberate the motherland. So this is the third song, and it's from the historical data papers as well, just like the Ormoc song I showed earlier. But that other song was in the Cebuano language. This one is in the Waray language, just like the song from Benjamin Lazara. And what's interesting is the geographic reference at the end. Again, the same opening, kamatay ni Rizal through fusillade, pagpusilasoha, di na yun magtangis ang iyang asawa. So his wife cried, the words of Rizal, don't worry, while I'm still alive, I will stand in the plaza. While I'm still alive, I will stand in the plaza. So these were lyrics to what was called locally as pandangyadi. So I think it's a localized form of pandango, so or a hota dance. And while they were dancing in the community, the lyrics were about Rizal and somehow evoke memories of the revolution. So that's quite an interesting uh, way of memorializing Rizal through lyrics to a dance nga song. But what does it mean? If I'm still while I'm still alive, mientras buhi pa, I will stand in the plaza. So again, ang context to this might be the early American period when all these statues were being built in schoolhouses, American-sponsored schoolhouses, or in plazas. And Rizal is always, again, wearing the overcoat, and he has his books with him, Noli and Fili, life-size ng mga statues like these ones at in Samar. So this is from a Samar-based teacher and historian, uh, and the SNS, Samar National School, that's in Catbalogan. So I think it's the same statue with the one on the Rizal Day in 1930, but it's been colorized, nanay paint. And uh, if you look at the other one at the bottom right, so that's from Paranas, now right in Western Samar. So these were built around 1916, 1917, so around the time of the Jones Law. So at the time, they were expecting that freedom would be granted, but it was again a promise of independence, autonomy in a few years. But that might have been the context why a lot of these statues were built around the 1916 period. But it was not only hopes of independence for the Philippines, but also local hopes. Okay, as I argued in the article, the motherland referred not only to the country, but also to islands, towns, barrios, and even personal mother figures. So I argue that rather than having a single center, uh, the Philippines was imagined as multi-centric, and uh, this is evident in a lot of the songs which I mentioned in the article. So down to the sitio level. So it's possible that the sitio was um, basically a survival of the Gamoro or the family villages at the Spanish contact, and Rizal had been incorporated into the independence hopes of these family or clan-centered communities. And the other evidence of the impact of Rizal is in this folk song. So if you're from the Samar Leyte region, this will be very familiar, Aniring Atuna, so the motherland. And there's thematic similarities to Rizal's Canto Patriotico de Maria Clara in the Noli Me Tangere. So it was an adaptation by Iluminado Lucente. So from a poem, an Ato Akuntunan na Tauhan, so the land of my birth, which was a poem written in 1911. So the all across the historical data papers, it's fairly similar in Samar or in Leyte, but uh, it's already the first two syllables. So the rest has been omitted. So for some reason, it's only the first two which were also corresponded. So especially the first stanza, if you look at Canto de Maria Clara in Noli Me Tangere, that's basically it adapted into the local language. And uh, the second stanza is again the expression of feeling that the Philippines was frequently enslaved. So there's again a strong emotion about the continued colonial bondage of the country and hopes of liberation. And I argue that this might be the fact that they reference the parents, especially the mother, Hirananay, or Sila Nanay. Here in the Samar lyrics, it's mother, father, mother, but in the local language, it's Sila Nanay and siblings. So rather than just one big Filipino nationalism, I argue for local nationalisms. So despite Rizal's promotion by outsiders with centralizing aims, nationalist forces from Luzon, assimilationist Americans, Rizal had become a trailblazer. So mag-uruna, an exemplar, or kasusgaranan or sanglitanan in the poems of family and community-oriented values. So in the songs, again, we saw Rizal was a son, Rizal was a sibling, he was a husband. So again, ang local community in his sibling compatriots' path to village-level independence and autonomy. So this is, again, another example is the aims of the Pulahans, resistance to municipal consolidation or centralization, and how there's little mention of Philippine independence in the historical data papers. The more memorable event is their elevation to barrios from or municipalities. So that's one of the interesting patterns you see. They were more concerned with raising their status from barrio to town, and perhaps sitio to barrio, if or sitio to town in among the more interior groups. But again, this has been belittled as barrio mentality. So you look for a Google search on barrios, it's always portrayed as negative. So it doesn't have to be so. So in conclusion, uh, in promoting Rizal at the turn of the 20th century, the revolutionary forces and the Americans were tapping into popular sentiment, which viewed Rizal's death by firing squad as the height of Spanish injustice. So at the local level, Rizal had come to be considered as a national sibling with the same motherland, whose death had to be avenged and whose example of self-sacrifice had to be followed in order to break free from what they termed colonial slavery or pagkauripon or pagkaalipin in Tagalog. So uh, there were different paths to freedom, also different levels. So different paths through armed struggle, through peaceful means, different levels. So national independence, local independence, sitio independence, but they had shared the same inspiration and exemplar, and that was no other than Dr. Jose Rizal. So thank you very much, and again, thank you for this award.
Thank you very much, Dr. Borrinaga, for that very insightful lecture. Now we will proceed to the open forum so our participants can join in on the discussion. So to our panelists and audience members, if you have any questions for Dr. Borrinaga, please send them through the chat box of this Zoom session. If there are no more questions, we now call on Mr. Wilson Villones to give us the closing remarks. Mr. Villones is the head of the Program Development and Management section of PSSC.
Thank you, Diana. Magandang hapon po sa lahat. I am delighted to be with you this afternoon. I am sure you have heard a lot of insights and ideas from the presentation of Dr. Borrinaga, especially on how Rizal's death evoked anti-colonialist discourses and inspired what Dr. Borrinaga called in his article, I like it, the village nationalism, this time outside the Tagalog-speaking provinces and with the thematic focus on the communities in Samar and Leyte. By the way, if you don't have yet a copy of the Journal of History, they are available online at www.pssc.org.ph/bookshop. So madali lang siyang tandaan. Now, for my first point, I like to think that one key takeaway that we can get from the paper is that the seemingly small-scale movements can in fact form the foundation and will converge into a collective struggle. Not only, as Dr. Borrinaga have said, not only for the armed struggle, but also for those who are advocating peaceful reforms or what we call the benevolent assimilation. It is especially important and particularly difficult to keep this in mind, especially in now in the sudden rise of authoritarian figures. What they want is nothing but the docile, the thoughtless, and obedient bodies that which they can easily manipulate. This is where our so-called political memory becomes crucial, as preventing any form of injustice and oppression rests on the solid foundation of political history. It is now the role of, I would say, every citizen, especially the social scientists, to prevent that from happening. Remember that our political memory, especially of the life and works of Dr. Rizal, coupled with a culture of critical social inquiry, can be an incredibly powerful tool to improve mechanisms on how we should go about the problems of today. Well, it probably won't end COVID-19, but we can start with baby steps, such as from small individual initiatives within families, communities, and places of work to larger and more long-term initiatives of social engagement and organization. So little by little, we can perhaps change the course and effects of the authoritarian systems. But whether or not we are into establishing a blueprint of how we can build solidarity or cooperative networks among villages or even among a nation, quoting John Rawls, we cannot afford a general retreat into a private life similar to those communities in Samar and Leyte. We need to be engaged with the social political conditions of the society under which we operate. Now, secondly, I'd like to think that another accomplishment of the articulation contained in Dr. Borinaga's publication is that it prepares us into the groundwork for continuing exploration of the concept of village nationalism. And it is interesting to me and how exactly values, local identities, and philosophical viewpoints of a village or small community are being formed. Now, for us in PSSC, rest assured that the PSSC will continue to support and sustain the VAM Excellence in Research Award and all our other grant programs. We continue to do this work of recognizing excellent research publications, not because these publications are a proven success that will solve all kinds of problems, but because these publications are relevant to current issues and hopefully will inform public policies and governance. Now, through our publications, I am hoping that the social issues can be approached more appropriately with data-based problem solving and systematic and participatory program formulation. Now, I would like to end by thanking all of the wonderful people who have participated in our awarding ceremony this afternoon. To our awardee, Dr. Borrinaga, congratulations again, sir. Our Zoom participants, especially those who have asked questions, and our regular and associate PSSC members. You taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us for the VAM Review Committee and we in PSSC. So let me take this opportunity to thank my amazing colleagues in PSSC for organizing this event, to Ms. Karen for coordinating and facilitating practically everything, to Diana for emceeing, and Miguel, Pat, and Johan for the tech support. So, in behalf po of the PSSC Secretariat led by my Executive Director, Dr. Ludas M. Portus, maraming salamat po.